Hi, Eric.
Hey, Aaron.
How's it going?
It's going pretty good.
Yeah.
So you're a scientist.
Yes, I am.
I heard some science news.
Uh-huh.
You may have already heard this. It's made it to NPR, so it might be old news in the science world. But I heard this morning about some brain cells in a dish that have learned how to play Pong.
Oh, you know what? I have heard a little bit about this. Yeah.
So apparently, they're human brain cells, I should say. And human brain cells, incidentally, are better at playing Pong than mouse brain cells.
Oh, no way.
Yeah. It's fewer brain cells than a cockroach has in its actual brain. So it's not a lot of brain cells. And they train it by apparently brain cells like predictable electronic stimulus and not random electronic stimulus. So by rewarding them with predictable stimulus when they move the paddle, they're able to teach it how to play Pong.
Oh, this is fantastic.
Yeah. So how many steps from there? I mean, where they wanted to go in the story was like, how close is this to including living tissue in our machines, right?
Yeah.
Computers that can think using organic capabilities.
Well, I've mentioned in the past the hard problem of consciousness. Did I mention that?
Yeah, we have talked about that.
We've talked about that, right? Yeah. I still think it's a fascinating problem. You know, the whole science of like connecting neurons together is what all this machine learning is about too.
Right. Yeah, it's similar.
Yeah, it's very similar. Yeah, that's a really cool experiment. Did the article that you read, was it the paper itself, or was it?
No, I just heard this on NPR.
On NPR.
I have not read I've not hunted it down.
Any fear mongering? Like
no, not at all.
Okay.
Yeah.
Because I could immediately see like, Frankenstein.
Oh, I'm sure some people will. That will happen. I doubt not that we could find those articles today if we were to start looking for them.
Okay.
But yeah, it's exciting. Like things are happening. So those brain cells, they're technically alive. But I think we could all agree they're not a person.
I think we could.
But, could it progress to being a person someday?
No, I don't think so. I don't think so, and I don't think it's close. But there's so much between here and there, right?
Sure.
Between consciousness and a few cells in a dish, that it's hard to even know how to even get started with it. And then, of course, even if you had it, right, the whole question of where would it have a soul is another interesting question. This is very good for Halloween, by the way.
Yes, absolutely. The brain that wouldn't die. And it allows me to make my sort of absurd question. Do you feel this is the cells in a dish playing Pong, which, may I remind you, was really cool about 50 years ago, playing Pong.
Yeah.
Metaphorically speaking, what do you think of the distance between the brain cells in a dish to us versus us to God?
Oh, yeah, I like this analogy. This is, I didn't see where you were going with this. You said it was a sideways intro, and I was wanting to just go along.
I saw the door and I opened it.
That's such a good question. God really is fundamentally different from us.
I suspect.
In many ways, right? But in ways that are hard to understand, which I guess that's what we're talking about today.
That is some of what we're talking about today, yes.
Okay. I want to try to answer the question before we just dive in. I know it's kind of a philosophical or even facetious.
But quite possibly.
Fatuous?
Yeah, all those things maybe.
Question, right?
But also mildly sincere.
But measuring complexity is something that we like to do in the sciences, right? There's this whole notion of order algorithms, right?
Yeah.
An algorithm can be order 1 or order n or order n squared. And this refers to, if you have a data set, how many times do you have to go over that data set to come to an answer, right?
Oh, interesting.
The classic example is the traveling salesman problem, right?
Oh, I just used that as an example with my sophomores earlier this week.
There you go.
Unsolvable problems.
There you go. So measuring complexity is something that we do have the means of doing so. And measuring the difference in complexity from us to a pile of Petri dishes, you could argue is just by counting up the neurons and counting up the connections. And if you do that, you get to a number that is so staggeringly large.
Yeah, really quickly. Multiplication.
It's very quickly. And of course, the problem with that is that it doesn't actually infer. It doesn't teach you all the complexity that's still there under the hood, right?
Yeah.
People oftentimes think of a brain with a neuron as a binary thing, right? The neuron fires or it doesn't. But inside the neuron, there's all these gradients that build up until it fires, right?
Yeah.
And there's chemistry and there's signaling and there's information that's happening even beyond that. That even if you could just directly model a brain, right? I mean, would you even get anything close to what a neuron actually does? I don't know.
Yeah.
Maybe. And so the difference between that and God, I actually don't know. Because the question is God progressing, right? Or rather, maybe I should say it differently. The question is, did God progress in the same way that we are, right?
Yes, but it also suggests the question that the brain cell progression, which you said they can't progress into us.
That
suggests
dish,
there might be
that dish won't evolve to us.
Yeah,
but mainly for dumb reasons. There's no stimulus. It's in a petri dish. It's in a lab.
Yeah, those are reasonable reasons. And we've rejected this is a simulation. We've already rejected that. Listen to another episode if that's what you want.
Well, today we're talking about more questions from the BYU Studies article that we brought up in our season premiere about questions about the nature of God and about us, about whether God progresses, whether he doesn't, and what is the nature of that, and whether we can progress like in between kingdoms in the afterlife. And it's a very broad topic.
Yes.
But first, we're proud to announce we have our first sponsor. I can't believe it. We've made it. Eric, we're ready to go. We'd like to invite you to read the book Beyond the Witch's Woods, Book 1 of the Kingdom of Adair by my good friend Nathan Calder. He's sponsoring this episode. He said he was really excited to be our first sponsor, and we're happy to do so. I'm going to put a link to this Amazon page where you can buy it. I have my copy arrives tomorrow. I'm excited to read it. And it's a fantasy epic. And there's a description here at the bottom. Eric, why don't you read it for us?
Oh, okay. Beyond the Witch's Woods is a debut novel of mystery fantasy fiction for adults and some intrepid kids, probably. It would appeal to readers who enjoy the post-apocalyptic epic fantasy genre without the traditional elements of a missing heir, magical weapons, nor enchanted items, but with a focus on mystery and detective work instead, and a meddling witch, obviously.
All right. Yeah, if it interests you, check it out on Amazon. And thanks, Nate, for supporting the show.
Yeah, I look forward to hearing your feelings about the book after you've read it.
Okay. The links to the articles in question today are in the show notes. So take a look, and you can follow along. There's 2 chapters. The first chapter that we're going to... Well, I'm not sure what order we're going to do them in, but the actual
we'll probably bounce
names,
back and forth.
Yeah. The one is What is the Nature of God's Progress by Matthew Bowman, and the other is How Limited is Postmortal Progression by Terryl Gibbons. And they both handle this topic of progression, like in general, right?
Yes. And it raises a couple things I had.
I should say, and this is the good stuff, okay? Among the kinds of fun things that we could talk about as random LDS theology, right? This is just right up there. This is the stuff that gets me excited about being a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, right?
Yeah.
The interesting philosophy and the interesting... I mean, I shouldn't say it quite like that, of course.
Well, let me
good
put it this way, because this
but,
isn't where I was planning on starting, but
yeah.
It made me excited about the concept of restoration again, which, there's a low level of excitement for that at all times, but in Terryl Gibbons' article, he starts by talking about how a lot of the ideas that Latter-day Saints have of progression, we live somewhere where before we were born, this is stage 2, we move on, there may be progression afterwards, we'll talk about it, but this is not original to Joseph Smith. I was excited to see that a lot of the ancient church fathers, and at least one mother from the first 200 years of Christianity, were on the Latter-day Saint side here. And Gibbons quoted the, quote, great historian Walter Bauer, who said apparently that heresy is merely the orthodoxy that lost out, which I kind of loved. Because there is an alternate universe where instead of he talks later in the article about how there were two main philosophies. There was the binary philosophy where you die and there's heaven and hell, and then there was the eternal progression philosophy, and that one lost ultimately until the restoration. But imagine the world where that had been the Christianity.
There's another quote on that from one of these earlier fathers. This is the condemnation of Origen, a church father of the 3rd century who ensured the supremacy in the Christian tradition of a theology whose central concerns were human sinfulness and not human potentiality, divine determination, and not human freedom and responsibility. So, in other words, this person, Origen, is condemning the early, and this was in the 3rd century, the early Christian philosophies about what is your central concern? Was it the sinfulness of humanity, right? Or was it the potential of humanity, right? So is it you are divinely determined to do something, or do you have freedom and responsibility, right? So this was great for me to learn that in the 3rd century, as you were saying, they were talking about this stuff. Yeah. Right?
It was a legitimate option for Christianity.
Yeah, and there's a whole list of people, like you said, that were all doing this, right?
Until it became heresy.
I want to quote our author here directly, Terryl Givens. He said, "By the advent of the Church of Jesus Christ in the 19th century, a plan of salvation that encompassed the entirety of humanity was barely a dim memory of the Christian past, except for a few small circles of a burgeoning movement called universalism."
I think it's fascinating, and sort of one of the overall threads of our entire podcast from the beginning is the idea that there is knowledge to be uncovered and there are mysteries to be unsolved, but those things aren't really in conflict with each other. And I find this a fascinating example of how this idea that was commonplace in early Christianity and that was lost is part of what Joseph Smith has restored for us. But we haven't finished the restoration. One of the things I found really striking about Given's article, in fact, let me read his final paragraph.
Well, let's summarize. Okay. The thesis is that you can progress between kingdoms.
Or you can't. One of the two.
Right?
Which narrows it down nicely.
And by kingdoms, we mean the telestial, the terrestrial, and the celestial
the various
kingdoms.
Heavens we believe in.
Yeah, that occur after final judgment, which the article makes a point of saying...
More than once.
Yeah, more than once. That the phrase final judgment is not in the scriptures.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, go ahead.
So the final paragraph reads this way. What we can know is that the church leadership decided not just once, as cited at the beginning of this essay, but again in 1965 and yet again in 1968 to declare that the question, is there eternal progression, is there progression between kingdoms or not? That question is officially open. Faithful Latter-day Saints can believe in the possibility of progression for all, or believe that the door is shut once assignment to a kingdom is made. We cannot, however, proclaim with any validity that one or the other belief is official church teaching. And the thing that struck me is, with all the examples of J. Reuben Clark disagreeing with Talmage, or just all these different famous names, right? Like B.H. Roberts did not agree with Bruce R. McConkie. It raises an interesting question, and maybe this is a heretical question, but it sort of raises the question, in what way, with these specific questions, this is what the whole BYU Studies issue is about, right? The restoration is not finished if we believe that the restoration means all knowledge has been revealed. But it does seem, at least on this question, a little stalled out. It feels like we're still arguing over what Joseph Smith meant rather than receiving new information. It's more of almost a historical theological question rather than one for which we seem to anticipate much new information. Which is interesting because to me this feels like a big question and a meaningful question, but it's also a question for the future, after we're dead, and so maybe it's not an urgent question.
This thought about how it stalled out is really interesting. In the other article, the Matthew Bowman article, What is the Nature of God's Process? The conclusion of the article is very similar. And he says, the increased comfort with ambiguity about the precise nature of God's progress led to renewed emphasis on a practical relationship with God. Right?
Yeah.
In other words, that people became more comfortable with not knowing the answer, right?
Yeah, whether God can, what God's progress means. Does it mean he's still growing in knowledge and understanding, or is he just growing in more and more and more? We haven't solved that question, and we seem to have stopped arguing about it.
Yeah.
And I'm interested in his argument that perhaps that greater comfort with uncertainty allows us to focus more on a practical relationship with God, rather than worried about those details.
Well, I think we got to be careful, right? And the way that you just phrased that statement, right? You were almost assigning an argument to the author, right? And almost,
yeah,
but not quite. My point is that it's hard when I read these articles, and I think the articles are very carefully written this way on purpose, to know which side the authors favor.
Yeah, it is good that I think that they avoid putting their finger on the scale.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. And I actually think that's really cool. However, having said that, in the nature of God's progress, whether or not Matthew Bowman intended this, I don't know. But it seems to me that the preponderance of evidence that he showed leaned in one direction, to me, at least to me.
Yeah, I'm curious if you felt the same way. It seems like if we're, by evidence, we mean the number of people who felt this way and which time periods and how many time periods, it feels like with sort of an exception for mid-century conservatism. Yeah, I didn't want to say that word, but that's the right word.
No, but he does.
Oh, does he? Okay, we'll blame it on him then. But with the exception of like people like Joseph Fielding Smith and Bruce R. McConkie, who his 7 deadly heresies show up in both these articles.
Yes, that's right. He sure does.
But the exception of that like small cluster of people who still have a lot of influence today, to be clear.
Yeah.
But it does feel that I agree. The evidence seems to be on one side, and it's not their side.
Yeah, and so we're gonna talk about that. And I should also say that I myself personally am not totally convinced one way or the other either.
Yes, I almost feel like it's a question. It's kind of a dumb question for us to ask because it's impossible to understand what we're asking.
Yeah. And in fact, let's go ahead and just quote President Hinckley first.
Yes, it was a cop-out, but I felt like it was honest.
Yeah.
He said that... Oh, sorry. So a reporter from the San Francisco Chronicle asked him while I was on my mission, and didn't even know this article existed. He asked Gordon B. Hinckley if he believed that God was once a man. Hinckley said, quote, "That gets into some pretty deep theology that we don't know much about," unquote.
Right. So say the year again?
1997.
1997.
Around the time of the 60 Minutes interview.
Yeah. If you don't know, the 60 Minutes interview, if you've never seen it, of President Hinckley is famous.
Yes,
in our
it was
church.
a big deal.
It was a big deal. It was one of these normalization moments, right, where the world got to see Mormons as people. And I still love President Hinckley.
And I saw that thing enough times because my parents sent me a VHS tape of it. Saw it many times. And there's a couple do you have anything that you quote, even though nobody else will know what the quotation is from?
Oh yeah, like Roger, Roger. Nobody. I say it all the time.
Roger.
Yeah.
Not from Star Wars then.
It is Star Wars.
Oh, it is Star Wars. Okay.
Yes, maybe everybody knows.
But there's one from this interview where Michael Wallace, is that his name? Mike Wallace? That's right?
Yeah, Mike Wallace.
He says, "What do you say to people who say this is a gerontocracy, a church run by old men?"
Yeah.
And President says, "Isn't it wonderful?" I remember that really well. And I don't know if I agree with him. I think that his point was a good one, but I do think it's a question that is worth asking.
And his point is that we're nice guys.
Yeah. His point was that isn't it good to have someone
with a lot of experience,
hand on the wheel, who won't be bandied about by every wave of which I think is a good point, though debatable, and maybe some episode in a future season. But here's a question for you. Like I said, I think it's very honest. That gets into some pretty deep theology that we don't know much about. But I want to go back to my claim that maybe it's a cop-out. Is it his job as, prophet and president, seer and revelator, to find out answers to questions like that? And it doesn't mean God will give him the answer, of course, and it doesn't mean he wasn't asking. But rhetorically, I think it's an interesting stance for a proclaimed prophet to take. That I think it's good for prophets to say they don't know. To be clear, I think that's a really important skill for a prophet to have. But I do think it's a reasonable question an outsider could ask us. What is the point of a prophet if he's not going to answer these questions?
Especially because it seems like they did declaratively say it a few times.
Yes.
In the past.
And sometimes disagreeing with each other.
Yeah.
You could sort of, even though it wasn't the point of this article, you could see that tension between Brigham Young and Orson Pratt in this article.
Yeah.
And Orson Pratt's idea on this was wild. I've never heard this before.
I hadn't either. Let's go there. Okay, well, let's pose the question, right? This is Matthew Bowman's article. And the idea is there's two questions, right? Has God always been divine? Has God always been divine?
Yes.
Right? Or did he, and I'm quoting the article, pass through a humanity much like ours along the way?
Yes.
Okay? In other words, as man is, God once was.
That sort of thing.
Right?
Mm-hmm.
So, or has he always been divine? And then the other question, right, is now that he is God, and however long that he has been God, either forever, right, or became God,
mm-hmm.
right, is he progressing? And if he is progressing, how? Is it either qualitative or quantitative? So,
yeah,
qualitative means learning knowledge, right?
Right. He's developing still in some way, becoming more God than he was yesterday.
Right. Quantitative means, as you said before,
just more universes in his back pocket.
Yeah, exactly. So I have pretty seriously believed for most of my life that it was the latter, right? That because I grew up whoever taught me this,
mm-hmm.
right, was pretty. They were pretty sure that I don't remember if it was Sunday school that I learned this. That they were pretty sure that it was God does not progress qualitatively, but does progress quantitatively, right?
Oh, okay. Yes. I didn't hear that until later.
Okay, I heard that when I was growing up.
Qualitative is what I was first aware of. I don't know what I heard, but I was first aware of this idea of qualitative progression. And quantitative as a more correct answer, I don't think I heard that maybe until I was in college. Okay.
And by that we mean, again, that God has finished, right?
Right.
And here quoting Neil Maxwell, okay? Mortals should not aspire to teach God that he is not omniscient by adding qualifiers that he has never used in the scriptures.
Yes.
Right? And I think that there is a very severe reaction to saying that God is still progressing in a qualitative manner, right? Because it does seem to go away against so many scriptures about, how McConkie paraphrased the scriptures, that God is the same yesterday, today, and forever.
Yeah, and I will say that although I think largely because it was what I learned first, and because it seems to fit in better with the rest of our theology as I understand it, I'm on team qualitative progress. If I had to choose a side, that's the side I would choose.
Yeah.
And I will say it results in much better fiction and poetry. But specifically in Stephen Peck's new novel Heike's Void, which came out earlier this year.
Yeah.
I was still startled when we meet a character who is a goddess, who is one of the daughters of Ishmael, and now she's a goddess.
Mm.
And she's sort of a goddess in training. She's a goddess. She's not an angel. There's a difference between her. Nephi is an angel and she is a goddess.
Yeah.
And
this is a work of fiction.
This is a work of fiction, to be clear. This is a work of fiction. Stephen Peck's Heike's Void, it's an excellent book. I highly recommend it. But it was startling to me, because although in my core, I accept the idea of qualitative, to see a God who is not as God was a little disorienting.
Well, let's be clear. Even the people that would argue in favor of an unchangeable God, would argue that we take time to get to that point ourselves.
Yes.
Right? But that there is essentially what they're arguing is that there's a termination to improvement. Right? There's a point that you can reach.
Some of them are. Some of them are saying God was always this way.
Yeah.
He did not become this. Which raises the question, if we become like God, but God did not become God, then how are we the same as God?
Yeah, you have to. We should make clear one of our assumptions. One of our underlying assumptions to this conversation is the second half of that statement that we said before: as God is, man once was. Yeah. As God is, man can become.
Yes. Okay.
So that is this tacit admission that we believe in this word that I hadn't read before of
Divinization?
Divinization.
Yeah, that was a fun one.
That was a good one, right?
I had to look at that one twice.
Almost as good as salvific from last time, right? Okay, I still can't do it. Divinization.
The season's going to be good for our vocabularies.
It's so scholarly. But that's my point. I think that is buried in this conversation, right? So if you believe in this eternal progression of us, right, which isn't even being, I think, argued in either of these articles. Yeah. I think they're also tacitly or maybe even explicitly saying that that's the case, okay? Then that would mean at some point there's a terminus, right? Where you have now reached perfection, essentially.
If perfection is equivalent in
Oh, but let me finish.
Okay.
But once you reach there, that doesn't mean that you're sad because there's nothing to grow, right? Which is one of the theses of so many pieces of media, including The Good Place, right?
Right. Yeah.
But once you reach that, there's nowhere. I mean, spoilers for The Good Place, I suppose. But once you reach there, there's nothing else to do. But that you are increasing relationships and your family is growing, and there's still love and happiness abounding, right?
Yeah.
And there's an eternal thing there, right?
Mm-hmm. So perfection is defined sometimes as wholeness or completeness.
Yeah.
And when it comes to God, do you think that there is some integer, like if we could measure the nature of godliness on a linear scale, is there some integer at which godness is achieved? Yeah. Or is it infinite?
Okay, so the only answer has to be that it's infinite. Okay,
that seems right to me.
We look in the scriptures and we read about an infinite atonement. Mm-hmm. So the concept of infinity is well baked into the Book of Mormon, right?
Yeah.
And the idea of an infinitely powerful—that's what omniscience and omnipotence really mean.
That's all. Okay, means all.
But
is all completeness? It's not I agree with you, but so it's not like an integer. There's not some entirety of knowledge to be known.
Yeah.
It's at some point it becomes infinite.
But let's put a pin in that because I want to come back to that idea later. Okay. So in the meantime, we're gonna try to follow one of the diversions back to its root, right? Because we wanted to talk about Pratt.
Yes. Okay? Right. Yes, I still have it open in front of me.
Okay, but before you do, let's just note some of the arguments for and against progression.
Okay.
And there are some there's some evidence in the Lectures of Faith. There's McConkie's quote that I just said, right? There's some in favor. There's some other points in the Lectures of Faith. King Follett's Discourse talks about progression from man to God. There's something called the Sermon in the Grove from Joseph Smith, I believe, and he said that God may have a father. And then Apostles, which is bananas. I mean, it's just outstanding. That's the only thing that makes sense, but it just throws a whole different question,
in both
right?
Directions.
Yeah. And then Apostles, Talmage, James Talmage, John Woodsoe, and B.H. Roberts, they talked about effort and education, right?
Yes. One of the things I found fascinating, and this showed up in both articles, was there have been apostles who reject the idea of being static.
Yeah.
There's no such thing as staying in place. Which presents the possibility of not just eternal progression, but you could choose to go backwards. And
the regression.
Yeah. And Brigham Young said, all organized existence is either in progress, either to an endless advancement in eternal perfections or back to dissolution.
Yeah.
Which is
scary.
Startling. That's
And there's another quote from Brigham Young about the terrestrial kingdom and how he believed that some people would progress and some to the celestial kingdom and some would regress to the celestial kingdom, right?
Which is, I'd never
heard that.
I'd always assumed it was like the emergency thing on a roller coaster where if it stops moving, it stops. It either continues forward, it can't go backwards, it's stopped. That's how I thought eternal progression was like. I don't know if calling it a roller coaster is sufficiently reverent, but That was the first metaphor that popped to mind. All right, should we talk about Pratt?
Yeah, let's talk about Pratt. The Brigham Young quote, by the way, is in the Terrell Givens article, and it says, "Those of terrestrial glory either advance to the celestial or recede to the telestial." Okay, Pratt tried to reconcile these two ideas.
Yes, he wanted them both to be true.
Right? And again, just restate the two ideas.
Some innovative theology here.
That God progresses but doesn't progress. And that's the great God.
The great God.
Oh, who's Parley P. Pratt?
No, this is not Parley. This is his brother Orson.
Oh, who's Orson Pratt?
Orson Pratt's an apostle. He briefly...
was an apostle.
Yes, he's dead. As apostle, like, I think that is a priesthood office you carry with you.
You're probably right. Yeah,
I think so.
But the point is, this was in the 1800s.
Yes, it's a long time ago. He's contemporary with Brigham Young, and as I mentioned, they did not get along. When Brigham Young became the prophet, one of the first things he did was reorganize the seniority, and basically anybody who was ever had a moment where they were not totally loyal, like he kicked him out and then let him back in lower down. Which, if he hadn't done that, Orson Pratt would have been the third president of the church.
Interesting.
And Orson Pratt, very different guy from John Taylor. It'd be probably a different church in significant ways. Anyway, interesting guy, had a great beard. From the King Follett Discourse, I'm now quoting Bowman's article, Pratt posited that, and now I'm quoting Pratt, the primary powers of all material substance must be intelligent, back to Bowman, and that therefore the totality of that intelligence, which was interconnected, self-evident, and eternal, was in fact what Pratt called the great God. So the idea is we call someone God, right? And that God partakes of the great God's divine attributes that are eternal. And thus, a God, I gotta be honest, like
it just starts swimming, doesn't it?
Like, it's so hard to like hold on to. To simplify it greatly, possibly to the point of not saying what Pratt's saying anymore, essentially, there are gods, and our God is one, and he started out like us, and he progressed, but he is also eternal because he's drawing on this great God, which is eternal and never ending and never changing, that all gods draw on. I think that's what he's saying. and it's awesome. I'm glad that somebody wrote this down. And it influenced lots of people down the line, but you ain't going to find it in no Sunday school manual nowadays. No, I suspect, yeah.
I mean, please forgive me. I know we have one Catholic listener. It kind of sounds Catholic to me.
Can you explain that?
That God is, permeates the universe and is part of everything, right? Mm-hmm. So we believe that God is a person that has a body, right?
Yes.
Boy, I hope I'm not screwing this up. All right, but I don't even want to say the phrase. A Catholic would believe, because I could be totally. I mean, I'm sure there's a diversity of beliefs, sure. Right? But this idea of a great God that kind of permeates the universe, it feels.
I can see that. There was somewhere in the first article where one of Joseph Smith's early ideas, and this was that a more, I think, again, could be wrong. I think a more Catholic idea that the Father is spirit, the Son's body, and the Holy Ghost is like their shared mind, kind of.
Oh, interesting.
Let me quote it. So this is from the original Lectures on Faith, which Joseph Smith did not write, but he approved. So the Lectures on Faith declared that the Godhead consists of a Father, a personage of Spirit, and the Son, a personage of Tabernacle, and these two possess the same mind. That's the Holy Spirit. That is not really what we teach anymore.
That's correct.
And the lectures also taught that God, quote, changes not, neither is there variableness with him, but that he is the same from everlasting to everlasting.
I mean, to be honest, if I squint, I can see what we currently now teach in the words from that lecture of faith.
Quote. You have to squint.
I think I do have to squint.
But sure. I mean, you could argue, for instance, that their roles in this world is the Son is the physical presence on our planet. Yeah. He is the God who has physicality, and the Father is not here, therefore Could be a personage's spirit, I guess.
Yeah, but that's not what we believe. That particular is definitely something that's...
We've definitely moved past that.
Yeah. Okay, so that's Pratt. And yeah, it goes into some pretty deep... And that leads right into Hinckley in the article. That's the deep theology. We just don't know about it. Right?
Yes.
But... okay, I can tell you what I want to believe. Okay? I want to believe that God was a person like me and progressed to be a God, and that still has room to grow because I find growth exciting.
Same.
Right? I don't want God to be static, which is one of the, as we said before, one of the words used to describe him by opponents of this idea, that if you believed that he wasn't changing, that he must necessarily be static. Right? That's just me. That's just what I don't get to choose what's true. Let's be clear. All right? And likewise, I want to believe in universalism, right? I want to believe that people can move between kingdoms, even though McConkie said that was one of the 7 deadly heresies.
I wonder if you mean it. By which I mean...
Go ahead. Challenge.
Yeah, so there's...
There's a flag on the play.
I'm just going to throw a hypothetical at you. This is not original to me. I'm stealing this from the play called The Plan by Eric Samuelsen.
Huh?
Let's do a little bit of reader suitors. It's a two-hander, so just 2 characters.
Okay, I'm going to read who.
Would you rather be Lucifer or Gaia, which is the premortal name of Eve?
I feel like you're putting me on the spot.
No, it's a tough choice. Yeah.
I'll go with Lucifer.
Okay. All right. So in The Plan, which is, I haven't read the whole thing, I'm embarrassed.
Wait, what is this thing again? The Plan. This is a book.
So this is a play called The Plan by Eric Samuelsen, who I think that if you were to do a survey of Mormon literature people, there's an excellent chance that he would come out on top as like our most important playwright.
Okay.
This particular one largely takes place in the pre-existence. The conversation we're going to read is between Lucifer and Gaia, which is the name he gave premortal Eve. Like Adam is Michael, Eve is Gaia.
Sure.
So they're out creating stuff in the ocean, and Lucifer is big into sharks. He likes killing machines.
Excellent.
And that's what they were talking about before. And Lucifer has reached... He hasn't technically been thrown out or apostatized or whatever you want to call it yet, but he's not happy. He's not happy. And we're going to pick up where Lucifer says, "Are you going to tell me to stop talking to people? Thank you for volunteering to be Lucifer, Aaron. Okay. And I'll be Gaia."
Quoth Lucifer, "Are you going to tell me to stop talking to people?"
"I'll be talking to them afterwards."
"Then do me a favor. Tell him something for me. Tell him I know."
"What do you know?"
"What his was like. His probation. I've seen it."
"It's not possible."
"Hey, you said I was bright."
"Show me."
"You sure?"
"Show me."
"He was nothing special. I figured, he was probably a king, or an artist, or someone really important, but no, see for yourself. He's 20. Mother was 16. They have 2 children. They sleep on some straw, on a dirt floor. They eat with wooden forks. They're no one. They have nothing."
"That's father."
"There he is. This is as old as he ever got. He married at 17, normal in that day. These guys came by. They had some dispute with his master. They took it out on his slaves. There. He fought back as best he could, but you can see it was over pretty quickly."
"Why would you show me this?"
"To show you how hypocritical this all is. Look at him. He did nothing. He was nobody. Someone to be slaughtered."
"He loved her. Look how he fought for her."
"Yes, he loved, but look at him. Worked half to death with nothing to show for it. How could he make any choices at all? How was he judged? He's sending us down as a test, to think, to grow, to learn. Well, what did he ever learn? How was he really human?"
"And you don't see that?"
"I see a peasant being bludgeoned to death."
"No, a man in love, a man who cared for his family, powerless and weak perhaps, but look at the choices he made nonetheless."
"I see an animal slaughtered. And I don't think it's fair to me to have to live up to some higher standard than that."
"Is that all you can see? How unfair things are to you?"
"Fair's fair. And he's not being fair. And I'm telling everyone. And some people already believe me."
"So it's true what Yahweh told me."
"Yahweh? What did he say about me?"
"He said there was a role in the plan for you. An important role. A necessary role. But a terrible one." I think we can stop there. Aaron.
Wow, this is fantastic.
It's really good.
That kind of got me a little bit.
Yeah.
I was like feeling it.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
What if your father in heaven was a slave who was murdered when he was 20 just because he was in the wrong place at the wrong time?
This is one of the things that's completely... Whenever I've thought about this stuff before, it is one of the things that's discouraged to think about. Okay?
I don't know anyone who encourages it. Sure.
I mean, this is deliberately provocative.
Sure.
Right? To take our loving Heavenly Father and to put him in this kind of position. Right?
Yeah.
It feels sacrilegious. It feels blasphemous.
Which is why the Jews didn't like Jesus, may I point out.
Okay. Well, sure. That makes sense. Right? But it's a consequence of some of this logic. Right?
It is. If any of us can become gods, then our God could have been anybody.
And when we say, as man is, God once was, we have to accept the good with the bad.
Yeah.
Right? Which is so interesting when you compare that to Christ, who was absolutely perfect. And this, I think, is one of the good arguments against this theory. Right?
Okay.
Is that you have God the Father and the Son. Right? Mm-hmm. And the Christ was absolutely perfect on earth. Right? Doesn't that... I mean, that's amazing, right? If God wasn't.
Yeah. There, in Slaughterhouse-Five by Kurt Vonnegut, the novelist Hilbert, who's a character in that novel, he writes a book. And in that book, he says some aliens show up to Earth and are like, hey, Earth, we love this New Testament thing, but we think you guys messed it up. And the aliens say, so the New Testament accidentally gives the message that you shouldn't lynch people who are connected to important people. The New Testament would be better if Jesus had been a nobody. You still get all the miracles and all the good lessons and the perfection, all that stuff, but he's nobody. He is just the son of a carpenter, and there's nothing going for him except for he's a really good person. And when he gets crucified, then God shows up and says, what is wrong with you people? I'm adopting this kid and making him mine. And that would send the message that you don't mess with people. But because Jesus is the Son of God, like, the only message is don't mess with the Son of God. Which is a provocative argument.
Yeah, I also think it's a bit misrepresentative.
Right? I think
Christ was humble, right? He was born in a manger, right?
But ultimately he was the Son of God.
Yeah, he was.
And so then the question then with this eternal progression is, are we ultimately all that well connected because we are sons of God? Or is Jesus in some way qualitatively different? Because I have heard people say that becoming a God is only Jesus. The rest of us, like, we get close. We don't get to become as the Father is. That's not mentioned in this article, but that's something I've heard from more than one person over the course of my growing up as a Latter-day Saint. Are we, eternally speaking, looking towards time as an infinite expanse lying ahead of us, is there equality between us and Jesus?
Yeah, I think it's such an interesting question. Christ is so different than any of us.
Yeah, today.
Right? That it is so hard. I mean, that's why he's so important. But I mean, we believe in progression, right? We believe
in some kind of progression. That much is clear.
That much is clear, and it's just it's like we've established that we believe in progression. Mm-hmm. Now we're just dithering over the limits of that progression.
You know what bothers me
in both directions? Yeah,
because there's issues all the way around. But the thing that bothers me most about quantitative progression is it just feels so like shallowly capitalistic to me. It feels like
it doesn't to me. I can see why you would say that.
Yeah. I would love to. Yeah. Go. You take over this conversation then.
It's easy to look at quantitative progression as a progression of dominion.
Yes.
Right? Of planets, stars, universes, galaxies, whatever it is. But that's, I think, the wrong way to look at it.
All right, let's hear it.
The right way to look at it is a progression of family. Okay?
Yes. I do think that's the right direction.
An increasing bond of love passed on from generation to generation, bound in a web. It's like I have, my wife, I have my 2 kids, right? And it's it's just the most important thing to me in the world, right? And that reveals a bit of my limitation, that's the small, I'm in a small family group, right?
Yeah.
But God loves all of us. right? It has this huge connected family, and it's only getting bigger.
Yeah.
Right? And the joy, the joys in my life come from my family. How much more joy does God have? And it's just always becoming more, right? It's just always being more and more and more. And for the longest time, that was enough, for me. I'm like, okay, I don't get it in the sense that I don't understand what it means to stop learning.
Yeah.
Right? But I do understand family.
Yeah.
Now is a good time to talk about infinity, if you want to. But we can go wherever you were going to go next.
Oh, I think I said what I wanted to say about infinity. So I agree. I think that is the right way to look at it, is a growth of family outward.
For quantitative.
Right, for quantitative. If you're going to look at quantitative, I think it has to be about family. But it does suggest that maybe then there is a point where you don't need to learn more, because you've learned, as long as you've learned sufficiently about love in order to be able to grow through love every time there is more, then great. Although I just realized that this is sort of like a love, an eternal love pyramid scheme.
I want to go back to infinity.
Okay, let's go back to infinity. You didn't say everything you wanted to say about infinity.
I didn't. We put a pin in it, all right? Let's quote from the first article by Matthew Bowman. Other church members were more equivocal than the lawyerly McConkie. Brigham Young University English professor and theologian Eugene England. Okay, so
our old friend.
Eugene England. Friend. Remember, our finale from last season was on universalism. This is going back to the same arguments. Okay, sought in 1980 to reconcile the positions of leaders like Young and Widstow, who believed in this God that can progress, or rather that God can progress, right? With those of leaders like McConkie and Fielding Smith, Joseph Fielding Smith. While McConkie was influenced by his legal training, England's literary interest in paradox led him to attempt to find a way in which both sides may be true. He suggested that perfection in one sphere is possible, but then so is progress in a higher sphere or realm. He thus concluded that it was possible to speak of God as both perfect and progressing, both expanding in knowledge and power, and possessed of maximal authority. This is what I like. Mm-hmm. And now it's time to check into a hotel. Okay?
Okay.
Have you ever heard of the hotel?
I have no idea where you're going.
This is Hilbert's paradox of the Grand Hotel. All right? So, imagine, if you will, a hotel with an infinite number of rooms.
Okay.
All right? And a new guest arrives. Checks in. The guy behind the counter says, all of our rooms are full. We have an infinite number of guests in our infinite hotel.
Oh, okay.
And the guy says, oh no, what am I going to do? Right? And so the guy behind the counter says, have no fear. All I'm going to do is I'm going to ask all the guests to move next door.
Okay.
And now there's a room opened up. Room 0. Or 1 if you prefer, 1 indexed.
I choose not to choose.
So he moves in. And then that's fine. Okay, a couple more people show up and they're able to fit them all. I mean, everybody has to move every time someone arrives, but it works.
All right.
Because it's infinity.
Okay.
A busload of people arrive.
Okay.
The bus is infinitely long.
Oh no!
It has an infinite number of people in it.
Oh, Aaron.
The bus, and all the people get off the bus, and they all want to check in the hotel's rooms. Oh, what are we going to do now? Okay, yeah. All we're going to do is we're going to map the people in rooms. Everybody go to the room that's twice the number of yours. Right? Okay. Or, no, sorry. Everybody go into the room that is, like, if you're, go from 1 to 2, go to 2 to 4, then go to 3 to 6, and go to 5 to 8.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
Right, or 4 to 8.
So each room number, you move to the doubled one. And then there'll be spaces.
And that leaves in between. Exactly enough spaces. And now there's now a new infinity available, and all of the people from the first bus can now go into the odd-numbered rooms.
Yeah. Thought experiments.
Still infinity.
All right, come on.
All of these are the same sizes of infinity.
As They Might Be Giants say, infinity, who's going to beat infinity? So added up, I just might win. Help me figure out where it ends and where it begins. Then I just might catch, and you might just see that I'm going to reach infinity.
What song is that?
It's called Infinity, off of Here Come the 1, 2, 3s, one of their delightful albums for children.
It turns out that you can show through a different set of mappings that it is possible for to create an infinity that's actually bigger than the infinity that we just described.
Okay.
All right? I'm not going to try and walk you through it. There's plenty of YouTube videos that would. But I'm going to give you an analogy that I heard once that describes this. Imagine, if you would, an infinite line that represents the number line.
Okay.
Okay? And every point on that line is lit up. Okay?
Okay.
With the same amount of light.
Yes.
All of the integer numbers, 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, are lit up.
Okay.
All right?
So we're going to go between the integers?
And all of the irrational numbers are also lit up.
Okay.
Okay? If you took away all of the rational numbers, not just integers, but anything like 4 over 6 or 1/2.
Anything rational.
If you took all of them away,
yes,
the light being emitted by that line would not diminish.
That makes sense to me, sure.
And if you took away all of the rational ones, it would vanish.
If you took away the irrational ones, it would vanish.
Yeah, if you took away all the irrational ones. There are more of them. There are more rational numbers than there are than rational ones. Even though they're both infinitely countable.
Okay.
So I'm not going to try to prove this.
No.
But proofs exist.
That's pretty straightforward. I believe. I mean, it should be proved. Somebody should prove it if it's provable.
So what I'm trying to say is, I like what Eugene England said. Right? Is that perfection in one sphere is possible, but then so is progress in a higher realm. I like the idea of there being layers to progression that we can't even conceive.
Yeah, and I don't want to speak ill of the dead, but this is what I don't like about McConkey's rhetoric. Is
because he snapped back.
This is of course he did.
This was the one of the things that he responded to in his letter back.
No, I'm going to say something different. So if you want to quote that real fast,
I'm not going to quote it.
And we've talked about this before, but I think ultimately, even an apostle, even someone intensely intelligent, I'm not interested in ranking people, but let's take James Talmage as an example. First American with a PhD I've read before. I don't know if that's true, or maybe first Latter-day Saint with a PhD. He's the first somebody with a PhD because it was a new degree, and he was one of the first people to get one. Very intelligent guy. The only apostle who was commissioned by the church to write books of theology. Interesting dude. Talmage's a great guy. And something that I appreciate about him is that he maintained a sense of humility and a sense of not not necessarily feeling like he knew everything. And I think Bruce R. McConkie was less skilled at that. I think he did it from a place of love. Like, McConkie was afraid that if people didn't feel like they knew the answers to these questions, then they would go search and find bad answers, and that would lead them down narrow roads. And he was kind of a binary. As far as Mormons go, he was kind of a heaven-hell kind of guy. So I think McConkie's motivation was noble, but I think it's ultimately erroneous and contrary to what I love about Latter-day Saint theology, which is that it is ongoing and growing and more than we can know, and we should be humble in the face of infinity. We can't understand it.
We haven't covered half of what I'd like to talk about. Right?
These are rich articles.
I love. I should have said I enjoyed what you just said.
Oh, thanks. I wasn't offended that you didn't.
For example, one of the talking about universalism, I loved the conversation about sealing promises.
Oh yeah, I had that underlined. That was something I wanted to talk about too.
Well, let's talk about that really quick. At this point, I think we've covered our main goals for the show. Yeah. I'd like to pick out some of the things that we missed along the way.
Okay.
So this is a topic that used to bother me when I was a kid, right? It was the idea that a righteous parent sealed to their children, right, would essentially bind them.
Yeah.
Right?
Sort of drag them into a higher kingdom or something.
In the celestial kingdom.
Whether their agency led them that direction or not.
And there's quotes that essentially say this in the article. So what do you have underlined about this?
So I knew exactly what you're talking about, but I was remembering an underline of a different thing about the temple. But I've come around on this. Like, I think that when we think about time as something that is infinite and is eternal and is going to keep going, the idea that the sealing bonds are powerful and don't go away.
Which, by the way, the problem with that is that it feels like it takes away agency.
Yes, but ultimately it doesn't have to, right? Because infinity is so long that people can continue choosing whatever they want.
Yeah.
But that opportunity is always there for people to come back together. And I think that there's an inherent optimism here, which is that given infinite time, ultimately people will choose the best options. And I find that kind of beautiful, that we believe that ultimately pretty much everybody's going to like find the right thing. There's in the most recent issue of Eriantum, of which I'm the editor, the long poetry issue, which is probably not exciting people. It was really good though. It's a really fun issue. And the poem Talking to Dante in the Spirit World by Daniel Cooper, it follows, it's sort of a shorter version of Dante's like Divine Comedy. But this time Daniel Cooper is being led through the afterlife by Dante as his host. And they pass through where there should be weeping and wailing and gnashing of teeth and all that stuff, but there's nobody there. There's nobody there. And I mean, there are people who are like pain, giving themselves pain, but everybody's free to leave whenever they want, right? As soon as they stop giving themselves pain, they can leave. But even more exciting and more interesting to me was he comes up with this idea that the group he doesn't see is the host of heaven that was thrown out. Like, they've all progressed out of that state, and most of them have gone to Earth and become babies, and the only one left still railing against them is the great Satan himself. I love that this poem and talking about the plan by Samuelsen and Heike's Void by, and I could give more examples, but I love how even though the people in charge of our theology are hesitant to reach decisions, there's so much exploration. I mean, that's what we're doing now, and it's what these essays and the BYU studies have done, and it's what these works of like creative writing have done. But there's so much room to explore something that we cannot understand, but we can triangulate from so many different directions and slowly come to. I mean, triangulation works in like a two-dimensional space, right? We're talking about an infinite space. It takes a lot of angles to figure out what the shape of things are. So I love that Latter-day Saints feel free to explore these ideas. Even if we're wrong, at least we're like trying things on and seeing how they feel.
It's interesting about... Absolutely. I was just thinking it's interesting about in universalism, right? Because we started this bit about the sealing cords, the binding, right?
Yeah.
About how it feels like it takes away agency. You could argue that universalism takes away agency as well.
Yeah, you could, but the thing about the math is once you add infinity to it, then it sort of diminishes that problem.
Yeah. And that's where I was trying to go, is that it doesn't, because time is so long. There's so much room and time to love people. Yeah.
That's what we're learning. That's how we're growing.
Yeah.
Which comes back to your argument that maybe the only quantitative difference is love. Once we've learned how to do that.
I mean, I still like the qualitative version better.
But we don't have to choose.
Uh-huh.
And if we're Orson Pratt, we can just be like the girl in the GIF who says, "Why not both?"
¿Por qué no los dos?
Yeah. That's what she actually says. But I didn't learn that language on my mission. Just one thing I would like to say about Gibbons's essay before we leave that I would like to point out is that he reads the relevant scriptures quite closely and points out how if you take them very literally, they mean something a little bit different than how most of us interpret the scriptures related to eternal progression. And given the context of what other people are saying at the time, that gives us another interpretation. Like, these really aren't answered questions. And I love that, and I didn't know this, but I love that officially the church does not have a policy on either of these. Or policy is maybe not the right word, but we have not defined these doctrines. We have not nailed them down to one right answer. Although some people have spoken as if we have. Officially, we have not, and I think that's kind of beautiful. Yeah, that's all I'll say. I'm not gonna mention the other stuff. Read the articles.
Read the articles.
They're really thought provoking.
I did have one other little digression.
Oh, sure.
About eternal progression that I've thought of as we were just talking.
All right, your progression digression.
Yeah, this may not make the final edit, but it's fun. Just a note about Orpheus and Eurydice.
Okay.
Okay. So Orpheus and Eurydice are two Greek personas. Eurydice dies.
She does.
She was bit by a snake. Unless you watch Hadestown the musical, in which case it changes it. That's one of the great things that it does. I didn't realize that, but it was pointed out to me that they change it so that she has more agency in the story. So she dies.
Oh, interesting.
And Orpheus, who is trying to create a song, who's a beautiful musician, tries to go into the underworld to save her.
Right.
Gets down there, plays a song that's like incredibly nice. And Hades is moved and says, well, I'm not going to let you both go. Exactly. But if you walk out of here, Eurydice can follow you. Mm-hmm. But you can't look behind you. And he fails. And right at the end, right as he's trying to get there, he fails. Right? Yeah. And he looks back and Eurydice is there. She was following him, but he loses his nerve. And and that's it. That's where the story ends. And if you listen to Hadestown the musical, which is, again, one of the best pieces of music around. I love it so much. One of the last songs is We Know. It's a sad song, but we sing it anyway. Right? Yeah. Okay, that's the story. Okay. That's the musical. I'm going to tell you about the video game.
Oh, okay. All right.
The video game, Hades, is about young Prince Zagreus. Okay. The son of Hades. And how he is rebelling against his father and trying to escape from the underworld. Mm-hmm. Along the way, he meets up with lots of people, right? And each time he fails to escape the underworld, he starts over and tries again. Okay. It's super fun to play. I'm really good at it. Along the way, he meets Orpheus and Eurydice in there. And at this point, Orpheus is dead, right?
Oh, okay. So
because that's how it works.
Eventually what happens.
Eventually Orpheus would die.
He gets torn apart by a bunch of Pan worshippers. Or no, Dionysus' worshippers. Yeah. Miserable way to go.
But obviously he'd go down to the underworld anyway.
Yeah.
But he's still separated from Eurydice down there, right? As you play Hades... Yeah. You can, this is a bit of a spoiler but it's a little part of the game. You can reunite them.
Oh, that's nice.
And it is so satisfying.
Oh, yeah.
When you finally do it. Because it's not fast, right? It's like 10, 15, 20 hours into the game.
Oh, my gosh.
It takes a lot of work. It's really hard, right? But you can, and I have to say...
worth doing.
It's so satisfying. That you get to solve that problem, that you get to resolve that story. And that's what I like about progression.
Yeah.
Right? Is the concept of eternity and the concept of resolution. I think that's really cool. And that was my little digression here at the end.
That was great.
We're a proud member of the Dialogue Podcasting Network.
We are indeed.
Which we forgot to mention last time.
Oh, no, we did. I hope they didn't kick us out of the family. That would be the opposite of, progression.
Yeah. It would be regression.
It would be.
And we love Dialogue so much. We're so happy to be a member of them. Do you have any Dialogue stuff to say?
Do I? I think I have a review coming out in the next issue. So watch for that. I wrote it 9 months ago, so the book's been out now for 4 months, and the review's finally coming out. So
cool.
Look for that. It's a really good book. It's called Joseph Smith and the Mormons by Noah Van Sciver, and it's an excellent book. It's a comic book. It's a comic biography of Joseph Smith, and it is really good.
You can find the show at Face and Hat. You can follow me at Aaron Brewster on Twitter,
and I'm at Amazing.
And
join our Discord.
Join our Discord, please. We had a great bunch of discussions on Discord.
Yes, they're sporadic, but when they happen, they're excellent and fascinating.
Yeah, I really enjoyed following along, and
it's not going to be a Discord that hits you with a million
messages.
But when they come, you'll be glad you're there.
One of the reasons to join our Discord is you can talk about the articles that are coming up. And next time
we'll be talking about The Keen Fall of Discourse, Pinnacle or Peripheral by James E. Faulkner with Susanna Morrison. And special guest star joining us, William Morris. So
yeah, it's going to be fun to have a guest. We've done The King Follett Discourse before. Do you remember? Yeah. So we're going to be looking for different ways to approach it. And I'm very excited about it.
Yeah, I am thoroughly confident that the article will give us things to talk about that we have not talked about before. And that's a good place to start, is with new stuff.
Okay, great. And we thank Daniel Foster Smith for our music.
Our good friend, the Music Man.
Thank you. That's it. Bye.
Bye.